Hi, it's good to be with you for the next few weeks. Although I think I've had weeks that looked a little easier than this one. Is Christianity homophobic? Well, is the Pope a Catholic? For many people, why would you even bother to ask the question? It's obvious that Christianity is homophobic. But then I've noticed as I've shared this topic with some other people, people who do go to church, they look sometimes puzzled by the question and sometimes a little hurt by the question when you explain why, because they see nothing in their own community or in their own hearts that is hostile to gay people, and they find the question puzzling. So I suppose today we really need to muscle up and courage up and face a difficult topic, and I need to speak with you in your lunch break about sin. About a particularly disturbing sin, a particularly disgusting sin, a distressing sin. A sin that is utterly opposed to everything that Christianity sees itself standing for. A sin that if you oppose, you'll probably get some pushback. But it is a vile sin, it's distressing and dishonouring to God, may well be pleasing to the devil. This is the only sin in my limited experience in Bible church. I've been in church for off and on since I was a kid, but was an atheist, then started to go to church seriously as a 20-year-old. The only time I've ever heard people urged to leave church, please don't come back, were people who were guilty of this sin. And the sin is, as you may have guessed, the sin of homophobia. Only once have I heard people told, please, if you think that way and live that way, please don't come back to this church. And it's for the sin of homophobia. Now, we'll need to work out in a moment what that word is. I don't think it's not a very accurate word in the way it's used. But for people who have some particular hatred or a particular expressed disgust of homosexual men or women, that word is normally used, as we'll see, I think, a bit inaccurately. And for anybody who calls himself Christian, who feels free to mock, jeer, poke fun at, speak with viciousness about or to gay people, that is something which has no place amongst the disciples of Jesus. Now, why would anybody think that a Christian would behave like that? Well, I was at the Gay Mardi Gras a few weeks ago with a friend, and we took this photo, which we mentioned last week, and you can see it up there, a group of young Christian people with a series of things saying, look, we are sorry for the way that you have been treated. Now, I don't know. I mean, there's so many there's 7 million different experiences of life people have got on this planet, and I don't know how particularly viciously gay men and women in Sydney have been treated by churches. I just have I've talked with gay friends, and they've, generally speaking, they've had some troubles in churches, but often, as they've said to me, it's mostly in our own heads how we respond to things that are said, although I've seen tiny bits. But there is certainly a huge story of historical mistreatment. As I've heard, the church has spent thousands of years killing and doing terrible things to gay men and women. Now, that may be true. I've got some knowledge of church history. I've followed this particular area. I'm not all that aware of it. Now, if you have the historical data, I'd appreciate being shown it, because no one's interested. Well, I'm certainly not interested in historical myths, and an awful lot of the stuff that we educated Westerners believe about our own culture is utter rubbish. There is so much mythology in our culture, which shouldn't surprise us, because all cultures are full of mythology about themselves, normally praising those in power, the hegemony, and very often the people in real power, not those who may have large buildings, the people who are the real opinion shapers. So there is a sense that Christians have that we've treated gay people wrongly, and for anything like that we do need to apologise. But there's some reality to it too, isn't there? There's some reason, I think, as there is behind all sorts of overblown views. I remember a couple of years ago being told by some men that I need to go and, this homophobic thing that was the viciousness against gays from the church, and they spoke about this church in America that is famous for its placards at various public events saying, God hates fags. And I said, oh, nonsense, I said. Twaddle. I honestly thought it's impossible to believe, that this is in the mid-90s, that any group of Christians could ever make posters like that and go roaming around the world with them. And they said, Ian, go and look it up, type that in, God Hates Faggots. In fact, that's the website, www.godhatesfags.com or .org, I'm not sure what it is the website for this church. That's their chosen identifier in the World Wide Web. And it's a church that some of you will know. It's interestingly, it's better known in Australia, I think, than in many parts of America. And that's to do with our media. It's called the Westboro Baptist Church. Just nod your head if you've ever heard of this church. Yeah, okay. My group of friends that I've known since I was in school, that many of whom are sort of atheists or practical atheists, I worked out that every second time we met, we would talk about this church. They would bring it up. As if it was like talking, well, there's the Orthodox Church, there's the Catholic Church, there's Anglicans, there's the Westboro Baptist Church, there's it was extraordinary. I mean to see if it'll keep coming up, because I've explained to them, having done a little bit of horrified research into this church, the Westboro Baptist Church, that has been disowned by every single part of the Baptist church, but unfortunately they'd never copyright on the name, so anyone could call themselves Baptists, as they do. It's really one man, Mr. Phelps, and his daughters and sons and grandchildren. It's basically one family of maximum 40 people. And the reason we know about them is because the media runs the story. And I think there are reasons why the Australian media runs the story on this particular church at least twice a year in the intelligent media. It keeps certain stereotypes in place. But it's not my job to judge anybody, certainly not, as the Bible says, certainly not my job to judge anyone outside the church. But these guys call themselves Christians. I can't make much sense of it. Let's just put, in case you think you've missed it, they've also got sites owned by the same church. God Hates Fags, God Hates Jews, God Hates Roman Catholics. They're famous for burning the American flag and desecrating it. These guys, at least they're fair in their sharing of hatred. And I just want to let you know what they think about Australians, just a few minutes on what they think about us. No, the other one. Not much, apparently. Sorry, Russell, I might have put this in the wrong... Yeah, here he is. This is the one. Actually, not to hear him is probably good. God hates us. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, don't worry about it. See if we can get the next one working. If not, we'll scrap it. Ain't technology wonderful when it works? He just starts off by saying, God hates Australia, a faggot-infested land, and talks... It was recorded when we had bushfires. We hope many more hundreds of you will burn. May the dear Lord burn you, you faggot bunch of beasts. And it was just, there you go. It's thoroughly Christian in the way it talks. And see, but that gets airplay, and there's a feeling of this is part of the glorious diversity of the Christian world. So there is grounds. There are homophobic... it's not the word. Homo-hating, I think, is the word you really want, but we'll come to that. There is grounds there. There are, in the same way as there are Christians or people who've been racists, who've been, fascists, who've been, that's just any name like that's going to have disgraceful people. But I think if we're going to interact with the thing, you don't interact with the most aberrant parts of it unless you just want to win a cheap debating trick. So there is reasons for it. And there is now, I think, a bit of a language warfare going on, I think. There's an interesting use of language, and that is homophobia is a word made up, as far as I can tell, about 1960. It was parallel from xenophobia, the irrational fear of strangers. But it's not really fear, unless you think you can see inside and behind everyone's motives, which is a common vain nonsense that Westerners have gone with, that I can see behind what you're saying through the real inner movements of your heart. Rubbish, you can. You may like to comfort yourself that you can, but you just can't get in there. It's hard enough for me to understand my own heart without you who don't know me. But what happens is that if a person takes a view against homosexual acts, they're called homophobic, and you say, are you saying that I'm frightened of gays? Some people have said to me, yes, but they're really talking homo-hatred. But then it's hard to get a good word. So it's, we've got words like misanthrope, a hater of humans. We've got misogynist, a hater of women. You really want a word. The real concern is for miso, homo. It doesn't come off the tongue very well, so we're stuck with homophobia. And the tendency is to divide the world into two groups of people. And this is done repeatedly by intelligent people, some accidentally and some, I think, as a clever political movement. That is, you've either got to be able to stand and put your hand on your heart and say, I absolutely believe that everything about homosexual things are fine by me. That if I had a son or a daughter who came and said, Mum, Dad, I've discovered I'm homosexual, that you would do nothing but rejoice. In the same way as you would if you discovered, hey, Mum, I've got blue eyes. You'd probably say, yeah, we had some idea of that. But it's just completely neutral. And if you can't do that, no matter what position, if you can't say, I think two men having sex together is a good thing, two women having sex together is a good thing. If you can't do that, you're an intolerant, primitive, hateful, murderous, vicious, violent, doomed to destruction, person who is unworthy and should be unallowed to speak. So, and there's been this terrible tendency to say there's only two positions, where in fact, apart from there being a spectrum, there are positions quite off the spectrum. So I know many people, and I think I'm in this group, who simply, I love gay men and women as much as I love anyone else on the planet. And if I say I've got gay friends, you're going to say, yeah, they're all racists say that, but that's just a fact. Some of whom think I'm a dangerous man, although they quite like me. Some of whom, I don't know what they think, but I know some of them have said to me, Ian, I know you love us, and I know you don't believe anything should be done to harm us, but you, by holding your position and holding that view, sort of gives some sort of legitimacy to uglier views. And they understand why I believe what I believe, but there's a whole lot of people who just say, look, I don't hate gay people at all. I understand that it's often a life that's been filled with hardship and difficulty. But I just think it's not the way human beings should act together sexually, and the reason I think that for most people is because God has said it. In our day, that's about the only reason why you would hold it, because if you hold that view, you'll tend to be viewed negatively. So it's hard to forget people. For example, this book I'm going to suggest, and boy, I really do want to suggest you take it and read it, not just because we're selling it at a ridiculous bargain, and we're not a money-making regime here. Glad you're here so we can part you from your cash. This book here, $18.95, I bought it for. We're selling it today for $10. It cost us $13. We negotiated for a deal. We'll cut it off just so it's a nice, easy one-note thing. $10. But frankly, if you never come to these things and you don't want to give any money to some crazy religious group because you have good reason to think they're lunatics like the Westboro Baptist Church, just take yourself a copy. I just think a chance to read this book. I know some of the people who've written their stories in this book. They're true. Stories of what it was like to be in the gay community, what it was like to stop being gay, how some have actually no longer feel attracted to people of the same sex. Others still feel the same same-sex attraction, but they simply are living a celibate life, and they're not blowing up and dying, as the myth will tell us. So I want to say, and if you think of yourself as a Christian and you've never spent any time trying to feel the terrifically difficult business it is being a homosexual person in our world, I'd encourage you to read this book. We're making a loss for everyone you buy, so but you feel free. We're very rich, or I'm very rich anyhow. So, but there is a viciousness in the conversation which is out of touch with reality, but it's winning a certain political battle, I think, because there are things operate at different levels. We can't watch Kirk Cameron's comment, can we? It'll go nasty. Okay, it's okay. You can. Some of you will have heard about this. It ran a bit on the news services, particularly on the internet. Kirk Cameron's a fairly well-known actor in America. He's part of a movie that's being remarkably successful considering the size of the budget and the cleanness of the story. He's a well-known Christian. He was being interviewed by Piers Summit or other, who's an Englishman who works in America, or Irish, or somewhere from over there. And as what happens when a Christian comes on to talk about X, they'll often be asked about this question always. I'm not quite sure why, but he gets asked about gay marriage and then about homosexual acts and love. And he spoke as gently, I would have put it differently, not better, but just differently. But he spoke gently, he spoke diffidently, he didn't really want to speak about it, but he was asked, and not to answer the question just means you get harassed and suspected of being wicked. But what the interesting thing was not just that this man, as has happened to quite a few others, spoke quite gently, but it was the response. Because this is the thing I think some people are not noticing. There's this assumption that gays have been the victim of hardship, which they have been, without a doubt. And so I think now the political wheels have turned in many areas. So let me just give you, I won't mention the celebrities, but they're quite well-known celebrities who just blasted Cameron for his views. He is called, and these are some of the nicer ones, he's the a-hole of the week. I don't think it means he's the alpha male, I think it means something else. He's the a-hole of the week. Why? Because he expressed that view as he was asked to. Another well-known musician said that Cameron is an accomplice to murder with all this hate speech. So I went back and watched the interview again. There was nothing hate speechy about it, except that he answered the question honestly and gave the position that, frankly, the greater bulk of humankind has always held. And if you're any sort of a Christian, you kind of probably have to hold, as we'll look next week, which is that two men having sex together is something which God simply does not agree to. And the thing about God is, there's always things as cultures move and change their view that God disagrees with. I mean, which would have to be the way it is, wouldn't it? I mean, if it's the real God and he agreed with everything we say in our last 10 years, you'd have reason to think, really? Is that all God's got to say, exactly what we've agreed on? Our little culture? Because on the areas of homosexual practice, what is an absolute known given at a deep gut sense that you cannot possibly say that if a person wants to have sex with someone of their own sex, that they shouldn't. We feel that very deeply in our culture, that it's just wrong and wicked. It's like asking someone not to drink water to do that. But there are lots of other cultures which just know at a deep intuitive level that it's just wrong for people of the same sex to have sex. So what is culturally certain to us, other cultures are culturally just as certain. So what do you say that, white fellas in the Western culture have finally got it right? We're accidentally quite tribal in a lot of this and quite unaware of the deep cultural questions that live around this area of life. So there's a lot of viciousness in the responses one way and the other. Westboro Baptists and the sort of thing that gets said. Some of you will have seen this, no matter how gently you may say your position. And there's reasons for that. Well, what does the Bible say about this area? We'll look more specifically at this next week. But frankly, it needs to be firstly acknowledged about homosexual issues. What does the Bible say? Not much. Not much. It's mentioned on 5 times only in the 66 books of the Bible. I mean, the Bible is not obsessed with homosexuality in the way that I think probably our culture could be described in that way. 5 times in 66 books in the Bible. 8 verses out of 31,000. Now, frankly, if God says something once in the relevant part of the Bible to the Christian, that's enough. But it's just worthwhile saying it's not an obsession that the Bible has. It is never addressed as a specific issue, as the main issue of any passage, in the way that, say, adultery is, which, frankly, is a much more troublesome issue to Australia, isn't it? But no one says, the Bible's against adultery still, right? It's heterophobic. It just, no, it just says you're having sex with anyone you're not married to in a lifelong permanent relationship, it's sin. You can call it love, you can name it whatever you want, it's sin. You say, but we just can't get married yet. If you're not in a position to get married, you're not in a position to have sex. We'll look in 2 weeks' time at how the scientific research is now finally giving us some understanding of why God speaks like that. It's anything but repressive. He actually understands the chemistry, which is not a great surprise since he made it, long before we did. But the Bible doesn't say much about it. The Bible does not say heterosexual sex, good. Homosexual sex, bad. It's not talking like that. You get no points from God for being heterosexual, which makes sense. Because if you're heterosexual, did you choose to be heterosexual? Did you wake up at the age of 12 as adolescence started, or 11 or 10, or whenever it started for you, and go, there's an interesting menu? Yeah, I think I'll be heterosexual. Tick. You think gay people think, no, homosexuality looks like fun. I'll do that. But we will look at the fact that 1 or 2 people have come out quite openly and said that they do choose it, but 99-point-something% don't choose it and fight hard and long not to be homosexual. So there's no great points for being heterosexual or for not being homosexual in the eyes of the living and true God. One other thing. Sometimes even Christian people, and sometimes people who aren't having a go at Christianity, will speak about Sodom, how God destroyed the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And they'll say, well, wasn't that for sodomy? That's where we get the word from, anal intercourse, sodomy. It's named, but that's to completely misunderstand the Bible, which is not uncommon. It is true that one of the last things they do is, the people of Sodom, to attempt to homosexually rape visitors, which breaks so many taboos in the Middle East. Any sort of rape, is kind of not up there with God. To rape visitors who you have this sort of ancient, pre-Jewish, pre-Islamic, pre-Christian understanding in the Middle East of the obligation of hospitality to the passing stranger. To do that, to attack the most vulnerable, that's not the reason they get destroyed. Ezekiel 16 tells you, the prophet will tell you why Sodom got destroyed. He says this, now this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. He's speaking to the city of Samaria, the capital of northern Israel, who are about to be destroyed after hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of giving God the rude finger and being unjust and cruel and etc. This was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, plenty of food, and comfortable security. Sound like any city you know? Pride, plenty of food, comfortable security, but did not care for the poor. That's why God, through the prophet Ezekiel, says that Sodom was destroyed. There's not a mention of the famous sin of sodomy. Right? It's arrogance, wealth, not caring for the poor. Right? That's the concern. It's not because of homosexual rape. Now you've got the passage in front of you. What on earth do we see from the Bible? Well, Luke 18 and John 8 both have a similar story. Look at Luke 18 verse 9. It's a great story from Jesus. This is the sort of story that had Jesus put to death. To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. Now friends, you may not be religious, you may be an atheist, and if that's the case, we're really glad you're here. That's why we're here. It's not just for spiritual sandwiches for Christians. We're here for other reasons. But we're here to give people a chance to hear about what Christianity is. Look at this. This statement, I think, covers many people who are irreligious as well as it does people who think of themselves as religious. People who are confident of their own righteousness. Do you know anyone like that who thinks, hey, I'm a pretty darn good person. I hold good values. I behave well. I'm a good man. I'm a good woman. Confident of their own righteousness and look down on everyone else. And my goodness, I'm a better man than many of the people in the church. I mean, I haven't been there for 30 years, but gee, they're all hypocrites there. Arrogance, self-righteousness, looking down on others, that's a thing that's often said of church people, and maybe rightly. Although it's been decades, and I mean literally decades, since I've ever met anyone who's in church, goes to church, who said to me, I'm a good person. They haven't said it to me. They might say, Ian's here, don't say about I'm good. I don't think it's a conspiracy, but I'm regularly told by my friends who are atheists about what good people they are. But what Jesus says here is, he tells this parable to those who are confident of their own righteousness and look down on everyone else. And he tells the story of these two people who go up to pray. One's the ultimate good man, the Pharisee. One's the ultimate wicked man, the tax collector. The Pharisee prays, I thank you, God, that I'm not like other people. Even this tax collector. Right? The tax collector beats himself on that. We don't do this, but in that culture, and you see it today still, people are grief-struck. They hit themselves. They're broken heart. And he says, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Right? And actually he says, God, have mercy on me, the sinner. He's basically, God, I'm just the worst man on the planet. Please have mercy on me. The good man and the bad man. And Jesus says, I tell you, this man rather than the other went home justified before God. Right? Any sense that somebody who says they're Christian has, that they can look down on their gay brother and sister and fellow citizen, or the gay community with sneering, arrogant, self-righteous, a pox upon you. You need to repent big time. Right? Any of that nonsense. It has no place in Christianity. And John 8, Jesus gets it wrong on both accounts, doesn't he? Right? For the judgmental moralist, he doesn't condemn the woman. He won't have her put to death. But he ruins the story, doesn't he? Because he says to him in the last verse, neither do I condemn you. Go now. He should stop there. He ruins it at the end because he says, and leave your life of sin. He doesn't even ask, is this a loving act of adultery? Does your husband not understand you? Does his wife, does she nag a bit? He doesn't ask, because two people having sex who are not in a lifelong monogamous relationship together, it's sin. Right? That's the view of God, and he's got good reason for that, which we'll look at in 2 weeks. But Jesus, at one level, he won't condemn her outright, that that's it. Nor will he condone what she's done. He is able to do both, as Christians should and need to learn to do. This is the sin of sins, hatred of people because of their sexual orientation. I'll finish on this. The church where I heard people asked to leave, before we have time for questions, was at St Barnabas Broadway. The assistant minister, Mike Paget, was looking after the evening congregation. We'd had a few people who'd been saved out of the gay community, a few people struggling with various issues, and some idiot, we couldn't work out who it was, had made some harsh comment to one of these guys. And so Michael got up and said, friends, I just need to make an announcement. He said, if you're in church and you're homosexual, and we had people coming forward who had their homosexual partner with them, and you're not Christian, you are so welcome here. We're so glad you're here, that you're having a look at the Jesus question. You're welcome here. He said, if you're a person who's become a Christian, yet you know you're attracted to people of the same sex, and you're working on those issues, trying to work out what Jesus wants you to do and how to do it, he said, though you maybe make resolutions and you fail, you're welcome here. But he said, if you think of yourself as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, and you've got harsh judgmental thoughts about others who are homosexual, or if you think you're free to say things to them, that will do that, he said, please leave. You are not welcome in this church. This is a church that's trying to walk with Jesus. And if you think you can be that sort of person, find some other church. Okay, I'm sorry we won't get through all these. You failed to mention it's not just the Christian view. Homosexual lifestyle is disapproved of by every major religion. That's true. I didn't mention it because it's, time partly, but I think it is certainly true that Islam, Buddhism have all been unmistakably clear on this. Doesn't make it either true or false, but it's interesting that for some reason Christianity is the target of most of the attack, and there's understandable historical reasons for that, and strategic. How do I respond to a lesbian colleague whose partner has just had a baby? That's a tough one, isn't it? Because you may think, I don't think lesbian couples should have babies, and you could argue that, I would think, partly naturally. It's clearly not designed by God as a fruitful relationship. We've got a strange relationship with nature. We admire it and love it, want to get back in touch with it, but then we do lots of stuff deliberately in the face of it. I would think you're unlikely to change that living in relationship, and I think there's a baby involved and it's going to be loved, and I think to celebrate with them and to be as helpful as you can be. And just maybe somewhere down the road you may have a chance to share. But if you don't love people, it's going to be very hard for them to hear anything you say. So I think if I was in that situation, I would seek to be as enthusiastic as I could. And they'll probably know, if they know you go to a Bible-type church, if this is written by a Christian, they'll probably think, it's interesting. I know he probably doesn't agree with this, or she, but these are 2-second answers. Matthew 19, a comment. We will come back to Matthew 19, particularly in 4 weeks' time. I put Matthew 19 there because the overriding understanding that Jesus has of sexuality and where it belongs is based in Genesis 2. So he gets asked questions about various parts of marital life and marital breakdown. He quotes Genesis 2, which, as you can see there at the beginning, which is, haven't you read, at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female. I think it's important that marriage is not a Christian idea at all. It's much earlier than that. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. They're no longer two but one. Therefore, what God has joined, let no one separate. This is Jesus' basic understanding of human sexuality and where it's to be enjoyed and celebrated. There's the comment on that. Some people with unwanted same-sex attraction are afraid to expose this concern to their church. Liberty Christian Ministries would be a starting place for them. Yes, we actually meant to put that up on the overhead. Look, it is hard for my friends who are Christian who find themselves attracted to people of the same sex. And I was trying to think, what must that be like? I mean, if I was in the minority, I mean, the figure 10% that I believed for many years, I went to serve at a boys' school many years ago, and an old friend said, Ian, realised that 1 in 10 of them will be gay. So I went in on the understanding that about 2 or 3 of them, of course, this is based on the Kinsey research, which we now know was a lying, deceitful joke. 26% of the people he talked to were sexual offenders. You think that's a representative survey of American people? I don't think so. Even Americans, you know. But 25% of them were prisoners. Another huge percentage of them worked in the sex industry. Oh, this is a very randomly chosen selection. I'm surprised you only got 10%, frankly. More recent studies have shown it's between 1 and 2% with men and even less with women. The figure 10% was very powerful in changing our understanding of homosexuality, which might not in the end be unhelpful. So I went thinking it was 10, 1 in... And so I was trying to work out, what do you do with, how do you help? And there's no doubt that this organisation, Liberty Christian Ministries, are brilliant. I was chatting with the head of it just last week. They do great. They don't do anything other than people come to them and say, look, I'm trying to follow Jesus, but I'm insatiably attracted to people of the same sex. And they've got a terrific history. They are slandered viciously in the media. There was an article in the front of the Herald a couple of years ago. I thought, my goodness, the Herald's actually running a different sort of story before the gay martyr go, but no, it was a gotcha article in the end. But I know people who've been magnificently helped through them. So I think they're a worthwhile group to look. I'm sorry, in terms of time, I need to shut up, so we don't want the wheels of the economy to stop this afternoon. But next week we'll look at, again, the question of what Jesus does and doesn't say and what the Bible says about these issues. Thanks.